very excited to welcome to the podcast Rita Cincotta, who is a leadership development specialist and founder and CEO of The Deliberate Leader. Welcome to the podcast, Rita.
Thank you so much for having me, Kate.
It is fantastic to have you here. And I love that language, the deliberate leader, because I think there's a lot to be said about being deliberate, about being really aware and alert to how we are leading. Tell me more about how you came to this name.
Yeah, for me, when I was working with leaders, either in-house roles or over the last 7 years within my own practice, the question often emerged around, did you choose leadership or did it choose you? And, as we were talking just before we hit record, there are so many instances of people that have fallen into leadership roles. And I think when we fall into those leadership roles, sometimes we work out that that's the path we ought to be on. But for many, they work out it's not the path that they should be on. And it almost feels really laden with not only responsibility, but the heaviness and the burden that can sometimes come with leadership. And I find that when we apply this lens of being deliberate and intentional, we are recommitting to it every single day. And so these days, that's what I help leaders to do. And for me, it's a really important thing. I think they're important roles with privilege, with responsibility. And when we really can look at the fact that there is that sense of responsibility and ownership, and we recommit to that, we're better leaders.
Absolutely. Tell me more about how you commit to that. Tell me more, because I think that that's a really important thing. And how do we start our day and how do we ensure that we live what we said we're going to do?
Yeah, for me, there are three key components of being deliberate, particularly in leadership. And it's the three key components. It starts with the leader around their energy. And we, look at relationships. So how do we be really deliberate and intentional in the relationships? And then the last component is performance of ourselves and that of our teams. So the way that we teach leaders to do it when we're working with them is really to look at those three key components and look at how they work together. Because at the intersection of those things are your mindset, your mojo, and the momentum, and what you want in terms of that energy that you're trying to create and sustain. For me, Kate, it's very deliberate practices. It's we say not rocket science and not groundbreaking kind of stuff. It's the grindy stuff that means we don't have to overthink our approach. And it means if we've got some tools in place around how we create and maximize our energy, how we approach our relationships, and how we approach performance and goal setting and the conversations that we have and feedback and all of those things, then we've got the key ingredients there.
Yeah, I love that. And so one of my mottos is always slow down to speed up, which I'm constantly challenged by myself. But it is so true in leadership. What I come across so often is leaders with the best intentions, but fixing problems. And they're often fixing the wrong problem because they don't understand the problem. And they're so quick because they're so keen to get the outcome or that they unintentionally then contribute to the problem. And it just compounds and becomes more and more difficult to unpick and do it. So what I'm hearing is in deliberate leadership is that sense of slowing down and being really deliberate and intentional in everything that you do.
It's exactly right, because I am probably, and I'm still learning this lesson, it's the go fast to go slow. I think as you mentioned, throughout even my own career, and it is a way that I learn and the way that I operate. And I don't think this is unique to me, but I'm quite happy to have a go and see how things go and then adapt and change. But I note that, and I have noticed that can create chaos for those around me.
Yeah.
Whereas when I slow down my pace, and I am a lot more considered, a lot more practical, methodical, not necessarily slow, but just a little bit more considered. There is a down. I find that gives everybody around me a greater sense of stability. And in leadership, that's important. We need to be adaptable and responsive to what's going on, but we also need to be able to, have a sense of true north. This is where we need to go. And yeah, I think, what you were saying there around it's the knower and the learner. Fred Kaufman, where I was introduced to this concept of the knower and the learner in his book, Conscious Business, many, many years ago. But it was that ability to be curious and to stay in learning and not jump to judgment and knowing because we have the title of leader.
Yes.
And I think that's where often we get caught, because I must know I've got to act decisively. It'll be decisive, but we've also got to balance that with being considered.
And curious.
Yeah.
What don't you know?
Yeah.
As somebody who works in conflict, what I often get presented with is the problem that's right in front of their face. So it's the complaint or it's the poor performance or something. And that is not the problem to fix. That is a symptom of the problem. And the problem is usually a lack of clarity, perceived favoritism, inconsistent leadership, like a whole range of different things. I love curious, and I often think, and I love that Noah learner, and it's been part of my world for a long time. And I think that I challenge leaders to be mindful of what they're thinking, because if we think in statements, we are thinking in judgment. We can't be thinking in anything else. We have deliberately come up with an answer, or we've made a decision or an assumption or something, but we are in judgment and we're a knower. Whereas if we're thinking in questions, like I wonder why, then we're curious. But you have to train your brain to do that, because our brains, we really love certainty. So we just go there.
Yeah. And I think the questions, we've not celebrated it in leadership as much as what we've celebrated that power and control that comes from knowing, designing a narrative, knowing it, creating it, and almost then going on the path of discovery to form fit something that we already think exists and something that we already know.
Yeah. And I think because, and we were talking about this before, but so many people do end up in leadership because they're very good at something else. Or, congratulations, here's your reward for being good, or longevity or loyalty or whatever it might be. And then I also think that we then create a narrative, which is, because you've been promoted to this role of leader, there's an assumption that you know how to lead. And so it feels uncomfortable to say, I don't know how to manage this situation. And so that then it just sort of compounds the problem again. It's just really interesting to see how middle management leaders often end up leading in a way that they don't like being led by. Like they didn't want that for themselves, but they don't quite know how else to do it. So they end up leading this sort of command and control, or telling rather than asking. And it's fascinating to watch. It's an interesting space, leadership.
Yeah. Well, I think that command and control, I mean, look, for most of us, if we're Gen X and older, that is the style that we were using, right? That's the style that we had in our workplaces. Yeah. Those styles still exist today, and I think they're embodied by younger generations of leaders because it's quick. It is the quick path to getting something done. But what we don't always realise and appreciate is what we're sacrificing when we're using that as our method, as opposed to questions. So questions puts us in a position of vulnerability as opposed, to knowing. And I think often with leaders, and I say this to leaders often, I'm teaching my 17-year-old daughter how to drive at the moment. So we go out on the weekend and we have our learner plate on the car, and that signals to everybody on the road that she is learning. So they give us a little bit more time and space, in terms of braking distance and the rest of it. What I have said to my daughter is, once you have those L plates off, they're unlikely to be so gracious. And so therefore we've got to be adaptive and responsive. And I think in leadership, let's say it's your day 2 of leading in a brand new team, you've just been promoted. We don't get the benefit of wearing the L plate to say, hey, we're a learner leader. Just go easy on us, please. We're learning as we're going. We don't have that. We are expected that as you go in to that role of leadership, your leader might know that you're learning, and they might have an understanding of where your strengths and gaps are, but everybody else around you doesn't. And we don't often communicate much on that either. We don't say, hey, I'm learning, so one of the things that I really want to be learning with you is how I can give you better feedback. Could you help me by understanding what's going to work for you? We don't do that. We just go in presupposing, assuming, and leading in a way in which we've been led. So I think if we had more room for that nature of curiosity and a little bit of play and experimentation without losing the stability that we need, I think that would make it a more learning kind of friendly space for leaders.
Yeah. And I love that. I always love the analogy of road rules and the road, because they are just an extraordinary example about how we trust other people. And we trust them because we know what to expect. Like, we've all done the same training, and so therefore we have reasonable expectations that other people are going to behave in the way that everyone else does. Like most of the time that works really, really well. And so I love that bringing it back to the learner. It's so true. Like there's some scaffolding there. It supports us. In fact, I'm really new and then I'm a little bit new, with the P plate. So we provide that scaffolding and then we provide that support. Whereas I don't think we've done that particularly well in business and in government. And I particularly see, I think government really struggles. I think they have different challenges and so many levels and all those things. But I think it's a very interesting space around leadership without scaffolding. It's scary.
Yeah, it's sink or swim. And if you don't have that support around you, we see people floundering. And I think, we could do a better job in organizations, and this is across all industries, but around, what's that scaffolding that person needs, and really quite individualized and bespoke for them.
Yes.
And working with them. And that's where, yes, it takes time. And it's particularly that middle level leadership when you're feeling the operational crunch from above and below you. It takes time, but I think it's absolutely necessary to be able to have that, development that is meaningful, but also tailored to people.
So you've worked extensively in HR and then now in this leadership space. Tell me, what did you learn? What did you learn in that HR space around leadership? Because it's a tough space.
Yeah, it is, Kate. And look, I spent over 20 years in it. What I learned that people are different. And I know that it's a strange thing to say, but people have different ways of working, different styles, different things that motivate and influence them. And what I learned is that you've almost got to be a mind reader, and it's not, but you have to have that ability to be able to tap into that motivating key for each one of your people. And a lot of leaders, if they're going super, super fast, they've got a vision and strategy in their mind around what they want to implement, and they're just they've got that in their mind and that only, and they're not looking at their team around what you need. Ultimately, that vision, whatever they've got in their mind, is going to be impacted in terms of its achievement. And the great leaders that I've had the privilege of working with are the ones that look at relational and relationships first, and then the job that we need to do. Because if you've got the right team in place, and that's technical competency, behavioral competencies, culture fit, all of it. But if you've got the right team in place, then the job will get done, whatever the job is, both tactical, but then, operational and strategic. Your team grows with you, but you've got to have that right mix of capability in place. And it takes a visionary leader, and almost going to that mind reading, but a visionary leader to think clearly and consistently about what do I need? Do I have the right players on my team? Do I have the right mix of capability? Because I can't have them all in like image or, all bringing the same kind of thing, that difference.
Oh, that's so true. And you would have witnessed this multiple times, and I'd be intrigued to understand in your leadership coaching space around leaders who inherit teams. They don't pick them, and they might not have the right people on the bus. How do you work with leaders around those challenges?
One of the best pieces of advice I was given when I was joining a new industry sector, and that was the university sector. So I'd worked for many years, almost a decade, in financial services, and then a job within the university sector presented. And the best piece of advice I received from one of the board members of that organisation at the time that I had previously worked with is, she said, Rita, it's really important to not judge as you go in. And she knew this. She knew me really well. I'm a problem solver, I'm a fixer, right? So you pride yourself on being able to go in, but there's a danger to that.
Absolutely.
And it was that advice that made me deliberately slow down as I went into that organisation. And I'm forever grateful for that advice, because slowing down meant that I was tuned in to why there were differences. I didn't go in judging the differences. I appreciated why there were differences. And it meant that I wasn't coming in with my arrogance around, this is how we've done it in this sector, therefore this is how we must do it in this sector. So, that deliberately slowing down, appreciating what was going on meant that I didn't judge it, and that my decision making was influenced by what I was learning versus what I knew. And I think context comes into that. So if we're not paying attention to the context and we're just bringing our same toolkit to the thing that we assume is the same problem, we run the risk of having the wrong tools to try and fix a problem. Like I had a technician at my place this morning fixing a hot water service, They didn't bring their tools to fix a fridge or a dishwasher, right? So they are technicians that are specifically employed to fix a product. And I think we've just got to make sure that we've got almost an adaptable toolkit, so we're not using this tool when we're actually trying to fix this problem.
Yeah. No, I think the slowing down, I have seen new leaders make their lives very difficult when they try and create change too quickly or impose I know best thinking when they don't really understand what's in front of them. I mean, that's incredibly difficult.
Oh, it's dangerous too.
Yeah.
It's like they've got their blind spot on around. Yeah. And also, I think it goes back to what we've mentioned, which is that the lack of celebrating learning and curiosity.
Mm.
And also it's that risk of, gee, I could be wrong here.
Yeah.
Like everything I've done previously might not fit, for what we need right now. And therefore, in that case, the individual's spending too much time and emphasis on the fix versus how can I grow with this problem? There's opportunity and headroom for me to grow and adapt and also learn as I'm approaching something new that maybe I've not dealt with before.
And that mindset is so powerful. And I think about this around people who have a lot of experience, and we're now in workplaces where there are 5 generations, and so you've got people who've been there for a very long time, and they feel like they're very confident and competent in what they do, and it's hard to let that go and live in that mindset of I might not know everything. Like, what don't I know? A colleague of mine in her team, in staff meetings, she got everybody to start every sentence with every idea with I might be wrong, but just so that everybody was on the same playing field, because there is that challenge of I know this because I've experienced, and that it does make a challenging space for leaders when you've got multi-generational, lots of different experience, but yet there's still a world of things we don't know.
Mm. And it's vulnerable. It puts you in a vulnerable position when you're saying, I might not know. However, what I think it does too, that kind of statement is powerful because it's an equalizer in the team. Yeah. It promotes, psychological safety, trust. It's allowing room for wonder and almost like, let's just go on a little kind of trip here and see what we come up with together. I think it's powerful.
Oh, it's really powerful. And it worked incredibly well for the team. The people who thought they did know a lot were very uncomfortable for a while, but they then got used to it, and it created a different mindset about how we approach things. And then it made it so much safer for people who weren't as experienced to have new ideas and to put things forward. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we work in this world. I mean, I'm 62, and I think my entire life there's always been, how can we do more with less, constantly reducing the dollar spend or the resources available, but can we get more out of our pound of flesh? And I think that is the challenge. It's sort of like fast, quick, easy. It's worked. Why would we change it? And yet the world is so remarkably different to when I started work. Like, it's so different. And I think the best thing about getting older for me is that I recognize that I don't know very much at all. I only know what I know.
Yeah.
And that's, a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I have seen and experienced that, but even with teenagers, through that lens of, there's a thing about experiencing and respecting wisdom and acknowledging wisdom.
Yes.
But I think, we're also benefited when we consider that wisdom comes from different ways, different lived experience, not necessarily the length of experience. It can come from a moment, and I think it's being open to how we can learn different things from different generations, different styles, different cultures and different beliefs.
Absolutely. Mentoring up and down and across and making that the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You wrote a book, You Are How You Lead. Can you tell me more about that and that title? I love that title. You Are. Tell me more.
You Are How You Lead. Really, we wanted to embody deliberate leadership, and that is that the way you act, it's more than your intent. It's actually not enough to have a good intention, because people, they interpret you and your leadership by what you do, not your intention. And so whilst we talk about intentional leadership, which is important, but that intentional leadership has to match how you are behaving, because that is what people are observing. They're taking their cues from that. And so, we set out, there's a key component in there is self-awareness, and we start with the individual and really tuning in to who you are and being prepared to go on a journey of discovery around who you are. And who you are and what you discover, you may not like all the components of that. And we also focus a lot on strengths. So it's not all about the gaps and identifying the opportunities and gaps, but it's also knowing what you bring, in terms of powers and understanding the impact of those superpowers. And, then we look at ways to lead, and we specifically look at coaching in leadership. And so we talk a lot in the book about, asking great questions, connecting, using different ways to develop empathy and appreciation, and really building on those relationships, which is that component of deliberate leadership. We look at asking questions that go to different territories and exploring a conversation. I've worked with many leaders that will go, yeah, great, mental note, I've got to ask questions, and they'll have their 5 or 6 key questions that they'll bring out, kind of like a checklist. And good, I've asked them. Good, I'm asking questions. I'm curious. But they're still kind of scripted, and they're still controlled by what they are prepared to find out and know, as opposed to it really being quite exploratory and organic. And we talk about that a lot, in the book. And then we look at support, and we look at support in the sense of being led by the person you are supporting versus you supporting in the way that you know how to support.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this puts leaders out there in risky territory, because if you have a method, a recipe around how you support, and the person that you're working with needs something different, you've got to be able to adapt and flex, rather than knowing how to just play one tune and that's it. That's my support.
Yeah.
And then finally, we look at how do you use calibration as a leader? So really, again, trying to stay out of judgment by looking at every piece of data that you've got. And never, and I've worked for a very long time, never before have we had the level and accessibility of data that we do right now. So with all of those different data points, but including the data that the person is giving us, how they're showing up, their body language, what are they doing? What do we think they're thinking and feeling, what they're saying, and really calibrating all that before you make that decision around what to do next. So we look at it through, those kind of components, and then also ensuring that leaders are paying attention to their energy. So understanding what sustains your energy, but also what zaps it. And because we can get into a real, we hit kind of go on Monday until Friday, if that's our traditional working week. And we're not often paying attention to, well, what do I need right now that's going to help me create more energy and an abundance of energy? I think as leaders, we spend too much time focused on time, and time and productivity are important. But I think energy, I would argue, is more important, because I can't create more hours in a day, but I can create more energy so I can be really thinking deliberately about what I'm doing with my time and how I'm using that time. And often that's about my energy. If I'm feeling sluggish and tired and I'm feeling like I'm drowning and I'm overworked, I'm not, that's not going to be firing off from a creative perspective what I need to generate new ideas. And so we spend a lot of time really focused on tuning in. Who are you? What do you need energetically? And leading so it's complementing what you need energetically. And then that helps you better tune in to what your team needs.
The know thyself as a leader, I think it's almost the most important part of leadership. It's very hard to help other people develop if we're not developing ourselves, or we're not aware of what we do. I love all of those things that's so powerful. Who am I? And I love the energy, because it is so true. Low energy is not exciting to be around, but also the team's looking, and it's like there's not a lot of feedback. That's, I mean, I've seen it multiple times. Low energy means we are just sort of paddling.
Yeah. I think too, Kate, it's that authentic energy, because even though you might have leaders that are naturally, they present as being lower frequency on energy. And I think the problem we've got, and often the myth is that we think leaders have to be, big and bold and charismatic. And that's why I love Susan Cain's work. She on quiet, because she said, no, we don't have to do it that way. And so it's about, when we tune in, when we know ourselves and we know that that's a sweet spot for our energy, we make everybody else around us feels comfortable because they can trust it. It's authentic. What their experience of us is the same as what they know about us in terms of our brand. And I think when we find that spot and we then know, well, how do I manage it? How do I maintain it? How do I sustain it? It helps everybody around us kind of trust it. It doesn't mean we need to be super high energy like Energizer bunnies, or really, really low energy, but it's just knowing where you are on that spectrum.
When knowing who you are, knowing how you're going to respond to things, but also I'm also keen on people understanding what it looks like when they're stressed, because that is often a time when our energy changes, and it can either go up, not for the best reasons, or or down because we might withdraw or whatever that might look like. But if we understand what we do when we're very stressed, then we can inform our team. So the authenticity comes from that. We can say, look, when I get stressed, this is what it might look like. And the way I'm going to address that is, like, I might go for a walk, or I might go home for the afternoon and come back tomorrow because I just need to have some space. But
Yeah.
owning the stuff early, I always find if we can set ourselves up and the team up for success, and that's like, what do we need to know? Like, it's starting a meeting saying, okay, we've got an agreement that our phones are going to be away, but does anybody actually need their phone now? Is there anything coming up that we just need to know about, so that if the phone rings, we understand why you're leaving the room? Like, how do we set ourselves up for success? And I think the energy stuff is so critical, and it's the stress, because the stress impacts on us, on our energy as well.
Yeah. And that can leave us feeling like we're not ourselves, like almost, a surreal experience. But if we understand that that's where we go under stress and pressure, we can prepare people for it, but we also then can mitigate, for it when
Absolutely.
we're starting to feel it.
Absolutely. But then we're also giving other people permission to be human and to be stressed and not perfect.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
right.
just think that one of the greatest gifts as leaders we can give our team is to be fallible and authentic. And I've never met the perfect person yet. Keep looking. As far as I can work out, they don't exist. But yeah, it is so spot on. So where can we buy your book?
Yeah, you can buy it through the website. You
Okay.
can Amazon, all the normal places where you might purchase your books from. It's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
there. You are how you lead, and yeah, we want to get the message out there as much as possible.
Look, I love your message. It aligns so much with what we do at the Huddle in conflict. I mean, it is very much around know thyself. It's very difficult for leaders to manage conflict in the workplace if they don't know themselves, if they don't own their contribution to whatever's going wrong. Like, I have a great question for leaders, which is, how did I unintentionally contribute to this? And when we own that bit, it's sort of like, then you can say, look, I've unintentionally contributed this by, and the person goes, oh, okay. And now we can have a conversation which is not about shame or blame. It's just about, oh, that happened. Okay, what do we need to do? And how can we amend this? So I love what you do. And I love the language of learner versus knower, because something that I discovered many years ago too, it changes the way we think. And when we do that, that's when we're truly powerful as leaders, is when we go into that learner state. So incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for your time today, Rita. This has been fantastic.
Likewise, Kate. Thanks for the
Yeah.
opportunity.